Joining us to help make sense of Malaysia's political stalemate is Meredith Weiss, a professor of political science from University at Albany, and she's speaking to us from here in Singapore. Professor, Barisan Nasional could have played kingmaker, but instead has decided not to join either Pakatan Harapan or Perikatan Nasional, leaving both coalitions short of numbers. The king now wants to meet all BN's 30 elected MPs. What's going on?
I think we have a mix of both disunity within the BN and especially UMNO, and some real resistance to playing second fiddle to PAS or to joining an alliance with the DAP and also Anwar. But the DAP, I think, is the larger hindrance within Pakatan Rakyat, Pakatan Harapan. A lot of this simply reflects the extent to which BN rhetoric has demonized the DAP to a lesser extent than Perikatan and PAS rhetoric has, but still sufficiently much that it makes it hard to align, and real disagreement within the party over whether or not to accept the leadership of their own elected party officials, especially Zahid Hamidi, and whether or not it's better for the party to be an active and aggressive opposition or to gain the spoils of being part of the federal government.
So many moving parts here, Professor. Sultan Abdullah proposed that Muhyiddin and Anwar put their differences aside and form a unity government. Muhyiddin, from the start, though, says there's no way that that's happening. Do you think that there's any possibility to break the stalemate if they work together?
It's possible. All things are possible, but I'm not sure how productive that would be. To have a unity government inclusive of all the parties would really simply replicate the current stalemate, but make that the governing model. And I don't see how that would necessarily move Malaysia much further along. Having instead perhaps a minority government with an MOU, something similar to the confidence and supply agreement type negotiation that we had under Ismail Sabri in the last administration, might actually be a much more productive outcome than an overly large and quite unwieldy, not inclined towards unity, massive majority coalition. So it's a possibility, but it's not necessarily the best option.
And how does the new anti-hopping law play into this situation, if at all?
It's critically important, actually. So in normal times, an anti-hopping law is really a suboptimal option. What you would rather see is strengthened parties such that it's not so easy simply to leap from one to the next. At this moment, though, we're seeing the real benefit of having that law in place because it restricts the solution set, the number of possibilities that could resolve the impasse by requiring a degree of party unity. Parties may leap from or to a coalition as a unit, but not in terms of individual MPs. Did we not have this law in place? My guess is we would already have seen fracturing, probably especially within UMNO, with a number of MPs jumping to probably Perikatan, probably Bersatu, in order to establish a coalition that way. But that does betray the decisions of the voters to an important extent.
Sarawak's GPS has said they are going to wait for the dust to settle before making a final decision on which coalition to back. What do you make of their sit-it-out strategy? Is it wise for them not to get involved at this point?
It may be inconvenient for the other parties involved, but it is extremely wise, I think, on the part of Sarawak as well as Sabah. They then maintain the upper hand as being the kingmaker instead of simply one of a couple of potential kingmakers. Moreover, by doing so, they make sure that the specific and quite distinct interests of East Malaysia are taken into account in forming this coalition. So whether that means a deputy premiership, as Pakatan Harapan has promised, or an expansion of the number of seats in the next redelineation for East Malaysia, as Pakatan has also promised and these states have demanded, or other concessions, this could be a very wise, again, if inconvenient, move by those states.
And Professor, are we in uncharted territory here? And how do you see this being resolved? What is the role of the king in this scenario?
We are most certainly in uncharted territory. The role of the king could prove pivotal, which is it's good that Malaysia has this stabilizing potential, that it has a king who can say, look, we need to have a coalition that includes not just Malays or Bumiputra, but all the population groups of Malaysia, that is inclusive enough to represent the interests, not just along communal lines, but also in terms of other divisions in society, and that appears to be at least reasonably stable. Good to have that force. On the other hand, it's also a fundamentally undemocratic force by its very nature to have an unelected constitutional monarch who is making that decision rather than having the parties able to work that out on their own.
It's one thing for us to watch this spectacle unfold as journalists or as observers, but for the people of Malaysia, this involves their country, their economy. And now police are warning of possible ethnic tensions after content on race and religion was posted post-election. You were traveling in Malaysia during this period. How frustrated are Malaysians?
Oh, so frustrated. I'm actually somewhat surprised, if happy, as a political scientist, to see how high turnout ended up being, just given how frustrated so many people were with the extent of political disarray over the last couple of years and with the extent to which that really endangers economic recovery. It's hard for investors to feel confident coming into a Malaysia that appears set for further political instability. So I do hope that that gets resolved soon. In addition, the level of racialized grandstanding, of branding the DAP as being anti-Islam or as being communist, of branding PAS and Perikatan as being inherently exclusivist, which is not always within their program. There is rhetoric that might suggest that, but it's not certainly the core point that they've been making through the campaign. All of those things are really quite counterproductive in terms of making it possible to reach a stable governing coalition and to address those economic issues, for instance, that, as the lead-in piece just now pointed out, really are so overwhelmingly salient for Malaysians across the country.
Professor, this is a hard question to answer. What do you think is going to happen?
I think something will happen. I don't know what. I do think that the coalitions will reach an agreement. My guess, which is only a guess, is that the BN will come around and will decide to join in a coalition with Pakatan as being the easiest solution. I don't think that UMNO will want to be second fiddle to PAS within Perikatan, to be a party that's smaller than PAS as a coalition partner. But I think to some extent for UMNO to be the smaller party vis-a-vis DAP is actually less threatening, in as much as the DAP under Anthony Loke has made such an effort to ensure that they are not claiming that, for instance, there could be a non-Malay prime minister in Malaysia. They keep reiterating that, to acknowledge the extent to which there is this demonization of their party. And so in that sense, that could really be a much more productive coalition if then at the last moment, because they wouldn't be needed just for numbers, but would still certainly add much more legitimacy, the Borneo bloc of GPS and GRS also joined. That would be a fairly encompassing coalition that would include a Malay-based coalition, BN, as well as East Malaysia and the other communities of Malaysia as represented through Pakatan Harapan.
Thank you so much for helping us make sense of the situation in Malaysia. Pleasure having you on the show. That was political science professor Meredith Weiss from the University at Albany.